Hey everybody, Randy Patterson here with Boomerocity. If you check out boomerocity.com in the review section, you'll find a review that we did on a great book on the Rolling Stones and their history with New York City called Can't Give It Away on 7th Avenue. The subtitle being The Rolling Stones in New York City. It was written by a great guy by the name of Chris McKittrick. And since that review, Chris and I have become friends and we follow each other's work. After that book, he wrote another great one called Somewhere You Feel Free, Tom Petty in Los Angeles. Again, another geographic based type of story, and this one being about Tom Petty and his ties to LA. And now you'll see that there is a great book behind me by Chris called Gimme All Your Lovin'. And it's the blues, boogie, and beard of ZZ Top's Billy F. Gibbons. Boomerocity has interviewed Billy a couple of times by email, and it's always fascinating to communicate with Billy. Seen the band a couple of times; they're great in concert, still are great. Still a huge fan of the band, but this book is fascinating. Even if you've seen the documentary, which is a great documentary, this book fills in a lot of gaps, shades in a lot of the areas that we left us wondering about things. Chris did a great job digging into a lot of details, a lot of urban legends, that kind of thing. So you're definitely going to want to buy this book and have it as part of your library. I did, and I love it. So please pick up the book from wherever you buy books. Also, please listen to this entire interview because it's fascinating, a lot of fun. Chris is a great guy to chat with. And while you're at it, would you hit like on wherever you're watching or listening to this from? And also subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. I'm not going to charge you at least. And it helps us out a lot. And please share it with your friends and ask them to do the same thing, would you? So, without any further ado, here is my first of what I hope are many more interviews with Chris McKittrick. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care. So, how did the Stones book do for you? Can't
Did
find it on Seventh Avenue is the name of it, correct?
yeah, well, it got me on the map, and I don't mean that as a joke because it mentions a street name in the title.
That would
Um,
be my kind of pun. So,
yeah, um, no, it did really well for me, it got my name out there, and it's sort of a funny story how that book came together because, at the time I wrote it, I mainly worked in film, I was the US editor of creative screenwriting for a while, I've done work with, Dotdash Meredith, which is the company that owns Entertainment Weekly and People.
mhm.
And so I did a lot of journalism, but I always have had this love for rock and roll and the Stones, of course. And being a native New Yorker, I always enjoyed how much the Stones were, whenever they launched a tour or a new album, they always did some big extravagant thing in New York City. 1975, they went down
Flatbed.
Fifth Avenue on a flatbed
Yep.
truck.
Hmm.
Um, you know, uh, for one of the tours, they showed up in Grand Central Terminal in an antique train. There was the big one where they landed a blimp in Central Park.
Yep.
And even the recent album, Hackney Diamonds, they did a show, a private club show, the day the album came out.
Mhm.
Which they're an old school band and they still have that mentality that New York City is the center of the media
Yep.
world.
Agree.
Um, and so as a native New Yorker, knowing that they played the Garden, they played, Giant Stadium right across the river, it just had all these ideas in my head that I was like, I really want to explore this connection between the Stones and New York City. And I just went out and on a whim kind of wrote it over a couple of years. I later found out that's not how nonfiction books usually go. Usually you pitch, 20 pages or so of it. Um, but when I eventually got in touch through an agent, through the publisher that put that book out, Post Hill Press, they were very excited because the book was already done, obviously
Mhm.
subject to some editing.
Sure. Sure.
Um, but it was just sort of something I did in my spare time. So I don't do books like that anymore, where I just write the whole thing and then hope somebody publishes it.
Right.
But that's how that one came together. And I guess it's one of those happy mistakes. I did something wrong, but in the long run, it helped me out.
You thought you were wrong, but you were wrong. So,
There you go.
and then you did the Petty book after that. How did that do for you?
So when I worked with Post Hill Press, they signed me to a two-book deal. And so after I did the Rolling Stones book, they really wanted to do another book about a musician and a geographic area. And a lot of I went through a couple ideas, and then of course I talked to friends and people pitched things. How about Bruce Springsteen in New Jersey? I'm sorry, he's from New Jersey. That's a little boring to me.
Yeah.
I like the idea of like the Rolling Stones, where they how they made an impact in New York. Traveling.
Hmm.
And at the time, I was actually living in California, and Tom Petty and Los Angeles came up because his music is so identified with Los Angeles, but he's from Florida.
Florida. Yeah.
And Florida, his accent is unmistakable
Mm.
Floridian. Um, and he still has that connection, especially since he died with the University of Gainesville,
Mm.
doing so much in connection with his family and his legacy. So that was really fun to do. I would say the hard part about doing that book was I was writing it shortly after he had passed away, and
Mm.
it was harder to get interviews for that because I think a lot of people were reluctant to talk about their relationship with him. It was too raw. But of course, the book was about exploring his history, so there was plenty to go on.
Right.
So I was able to work with that.
So did it do well for you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think if I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it outsold the Stones book, which,
Really? Ooh.
yeah, which I was a little surprised.
Yeah.
But you know, hey,
Timing's
I'm not,
everything.
yeah, exactly. I'm not going to be Stephen King anytime soon with my book sales,
That's right. Hey,
but
don't
as
sell
long as a
yourself
few people,
short.
exactly, as long as a few people like the books, I'm happy.
There you go. So, what led you to do this one here behind me with about Billy Gibbons? Tell me about
So, Billy Gibbons is a fascinating, and ZZ Top, of course, are fascinating subjects. I've always been a huge fan of the band. Really love the fact that they have had their the band and Billy Gibbons in particular are masters of image when it comes to rock and roll. To this day, you see a guy in a bar with a long beard, whether or not he's wearing sunglasses, someone is going to say something. Hey, that guy looks like ZZ Top.
it. Mm,
They may not know Billy Gibbons, they may not know Dusty Hill,
but they know the
or
band.
Frank Beard for that
Yeah,
matter, but
right.
they will know ZZ Top.
Yeah.
Um, and I have friends that have long beards, and they say, "Yeah, every once in a while I get a ZZ Top joke. It just is natural." Um, and that part of their image has made them some of the most that made Billy Gibbons one of the most recognizable faces in rock and roll history. His image is unmistakable. And there's been other guys that have had long beards,
Mm,
but nobody has quite done it like them. And of course, I haven't even touched upon the music, which is wonderful. Whether you go back to their early albums, Tres Hombres, of
mm,
course, with Lagrange is one of the classic rock radio staples if you ever had one.
absolutely.
And then we're able to capture the MTV audience next to all the pretty boys like George Michael and Duran Duran. You had these three old relative to them at the time. All of a sudden, relaunching their career with Eliminator and doing all the great stuff they did in the '80s
Mhm.
with the massive hits. So that's always been so appealing to me. But what's also appealing to me about Billy Gibbons and wanted to really get into in the book is he's quite the myth maker. Um, about himself, his career. Even when ZZ Top launched, they were with a manager named Bill Ham, who has since passed. And Bill Ham really helped them cultivate that image of what they became, but also part of the myth making about them, making them so closely related to Texas, making them so making sure that they always appear together as a trio. Up until recently, you very rarely, maybe in the last 15 years, where Billy Gibbons has kind of become his own little media star.
Right.
You really didn't see the band except together doing interviews, always with the cheap sunglasses on, although I'm sure they're more expensive than they look.
A little.
Yeah, exactly. And really making sure the idea highlighting what's so important about image in presentation in rock and roll, making those MTV videos were a huge hit
Mm,
back then, and so that really fascinated me because Gibbons, when you read interviews with him, it's hard to get a straight answer from him about his life, his career. He's giving conflicting stories
It's hard to get
about.
an interview with him. I've done it twice, but only by email. So
Yeah, yeah, and conflicting stories about his background. One thing I explore in the book is his connection to Jimi Hendrix, which is often touted. Um, you'll see online, and as I'm sure we've learned, the internet is a wonderful tool for doing research, but also a horrible tool on finding information that's incorrect.
right.
Um, and you'll see endlessly on the internet stories about or anecdotes about how Billy Gibbons was Jimi Hendrix's favorite young guitarist, which is quite a badge of honor to put on. And ZZ Top even highlighted that in some of their early press stuff like that, which was impressive. But the fact of the matter is, there's a little more to the Hendrix story than has gone on. I feel like Billy Gibbons has done his part to play it up, because
Why
who
not?
would not want to be
That's
Jimi
right.
Hendrix's favorite guitarist? But there's a lot more to that story, and I had got some insight from a big Hendrix expert to kind of weigh in on those myths, the truth and the fiction about that. But that's simply something about rock and roll. Rock and roll is such a myth making
Mhm.
uh, part of the culture. And I've learned that working on my Stones book, the amount of stories I heard about Keith Richards, that just doing a tiny bit of research, you go, this is impossible. This couldn't
Yeah.
have happened. And there were a few I called out in my book, not to make the teller of the story look bad, but sort of, they said this great grand story about Keith Richards running into them and partying with him in New York City. But it couldn't have possibly happened because the Stones were touring Europe at that time. So, you know, um, but it's all in good fun. I'm a huge fan of ZZ Top, always have been. And, the type books sort of look behind the curtain to see what makes this band so successful, the highs, the lows, what they learned from some of the mistakes, the missteps, and celebrate the wonderful music they have provided us for decades.
Were you able to interview Billy?
No, I unfortunately not. I do have a funny story where I ran into him years before I wrote the book. I used to live in New York City, and I was walking in Lower Manhattan late one night. I was actually going to a movie screening at the time. I was covering it, and all of a sudden, I see this guy walk past me, and this is the importance of image. And I go, that's Billy Gibbons. There's no way that could be anyone else. There's certain times you see a certain celebrity, and sure enough, it was. And he was going to um, uh, a party at what used to be CBGB's and
Okay.
became a John Varvatos store. They were
Right.
having some party there, and I did stop him and I said, Billy Gibbons. I talked to him for all of 30 seconds, and then I did mention that when I was trying to get the interview. Hey, I saw you, 10 years ago for 30 seconds, but he's a busy guy. He's on tour with ZZ Top
Yep.
with Elwood Francis, their current bassist.
Yeah.
They're doing a tour. They just finished Europe, and they're about to launch their US tour that goes right through Thanksgiving. And when he's not with ZZ Top, he's doing all types of his own projects. He's a very busy guy.
And collaborating. So
Yes,
my two Billy Gibbons stories that you might find fun. First time I ever saw them in concert was 3 years ago. Of course, Dusty had already passed, and Elrod was already on with the band, and so I saw him in Chattanooga. I'm up here in Sevierville, Tennessee, in the Smokies,
sure.
and they were playing down in Chattanooga. And my brother-in-law and I went to this show. Billy's publicist gave me the tickets, Bob Merlis,
Yes.
and so we're in the theater, and this is, the pandemic had lifted just a couple months prior. So everybody's still a little skittish. There's no meet and greet or anything backstage. But there's these two guys sitting in front of my brother-in-law and I, and they're just giddy as all get out. And I mean, they're stoked. I'm thinking maybe they had a little bit of something to affect that. And they turn around and start talking with us. And long story short, one of the two guys was in a bar the night before, and Billy was in there. And this kid, I mean, I'm gonna say kid, he was in his 20s, but acting like a kid. And he went up and introduced himself to Billy. He said, "Hey, You and the band were my dad's favorite band, and my dad and I bonded over this, all that. Billy said, "Hey, are you going to the show?" He said, "No, we weren't able to get tickets." He goes, "Hold on a second." Makes a call. He goes, "You got 2 tickets. Enjoy." Gave these kids 2 tickets to go to the show. This guy just from a chance meeting inside of a
Wow.
bar there in Chattanooga. And then, my other story about the whole band, very, very short, very sad, was, before I launched Boomerocity, I was living in Dallas, and, Stevie Ray Vaughan died, a Dallasite, and I went to the funeral like 2,000 other people did, and, the band, all 3 of the guys were there,
Oh, wow.
and they were sitting on the front row with the family, and I thought that spoke volumes of them, both for the Stevie Ray Vaughan thing and what Billy did for these young fans. That shows that there's a heart with the mystique, in my opinion. So,
Yeah, I heard a great story that's in the book from Michelle Conlin, who was on the TV series Bones,
mhm.
and Billy Gibbons actually had a supporting role on the show. On occasion, he was probably in about a dozen or so episodes. He played her father on the show,
Oh, I didn't know
and
that.
yeah, and he was never identified as Billy Gibbons, but he was supposed to be Billy Gibbons. Like it was kind of an interesting thing they did. And she just talked about when she first started working with him that she was unsure because he's not a professional actor. And she says, sometimes when you work with someone who's not a professional actor, you don't really know, how it's going to go, if it's going to be challenging. And she said, but he was couldn't have been a sweeter guy. And when the when ZZ Top was on tour, he actually got tickets for her and her father and brought her father backstage and met him. And she said, that was just such a generous thing to do, because, they only worked together maybe on a 10 or 12 episodes, but, they were able to form that bond, which is great. And, that was what's wonderful about the people I were able to talk to. A lot of people that worked with the band and collaborated with Gibbons over the years. One of the great interview subjects I had was a man named Ty Ravine, who is a magician uh, in Canada, and his connection to Billy Gibbons is he designed. He's in addition to being a magician, he designs a lot of stage effects for concerts, and he designed the Afterburner stage
Oh,
for the
wow.
the band's Afterburner tour,
Yeah.
and he just talked about how collaborative Gibbons was and how important it was. He goes, I've worked with rock stars that, basically, just hand you a check and say, do this. And, they're not really collaborative on it and they're bossy and he goes, but Billy Gibbons was right there, sharing the ideas and helping them. And that's actually how he and this is an interesting story how the stage because the Afterburner album has this kind of space age
Yeah.
thing, both the music videos and the cover art,
Mhm.
um, which sort of kind of seems a little odd if you think about it, about this band from Texas. They were very sort of frontier cowboyish.
Yeah.
They did the big tour where they brought Texas to the people, and yet they have this. How'd they go from that to spaceships? And it turns out that Ty Ravine told me he initially pitched the stage design for that to Loverboy for the Canadian rock band Loverboy for their whatever tour they were doing with the song that was loving every minute of it, because there's references to rocket ships in
Mhm.
the lyrics of that song. And Loverboy never called him back. So when he met Billy Gibbons in Vegas, because he as a magician, he had a lot of connections in
Right.
Vegas. Uh, he pitched this to him, and Bill Ham, the manager of ZZ Top, loved the design and everything of the stage. He says, "But we're the little old band from Texas. What do we have to do with space and spaceships?" And Ty Ravine told me, he goes, in a moment of genius, I said, "Are you kidding me? Houston is in Texas,
Mm.
and Houston is home of the world's most important space station, and through that, that's how they saw the Texas connection, and that's how it kind of grew on them. And that's how we ended up getting a ZZ Top album set in space, I guess is the
Wow.
best way to put it.
Were there any surprises or maybe even put another way, did you learn anything about Billy and the band that you didn't already know?
What I found really surprising, because a lot, we have to keep in mind with a lot of these classic rock bands, they start, they have a great, some of them have that 10-year or even sometimes 15-year, if they're really lucky, 20-year uh, part of their career where they're putting out new material, they're doing big tours, they're having hits on the charts, and then of course comes like the aftermath and how they deal with that. Do they keep doing the greatest hits tour? Do they keep putting out new albums? Um, and one of the things I found really interesting and sort of inspiring in a way was right after ZZ Top put out their 1990 album Recycler. 2 or 3 years after that, they finished the tour. They signed a huge record deal with RCA. This was the early 90s when the Stones signed that huge record deal.
Mhm.
Motley Crue signed a huge record deal, because none of the record labels at the time realized where record sales were going to go within the next 10
Yeah,
years from
yeah,
90,
south.
let's say 92 to
Yeah,
2002, and then after. So a lot of bands were getting signed to these monster deals, including ZZ Top, and so they were having some trouble um, with their 90s albums. And there's some of those 1990s albums have some great songs on them. I
yeah,
really like Antenna, uh, from which was 94. It had Pincushion, which was a
yeah.
major part of that set for their set for years. And then their 96 album, they had that song they, you know, they had, now it's on the tip of my tongue. I'm just talking about how much I like this song. Um, anyway, but, so they had a couple of big songs, but they really struggled because they were no longer the MTV stars. They were no longer, on modern rock radio as they were, on or even on pop radio. And so, seeing how they kind of adapted to over the 1990s, trying different things with their sound. Because after all, that's what they did with Eliminator in 1983. That was a, a, a sort of combination of what was going on in modern music, first adding to their Texas blues,
Right.
and coming up with this great combination. So even though some of those efforts weren't so successful, I really thought it was kind of inspiring to see them jump to different type try different genres, try different things in the music. And Gibbons himself had still did that his first solo album. He did a lot with Cuban music
Mm,
on that. And you don't see a lot of that. A lot of bands of that era, they tend to try to rewrite the same thing over and over again.
right.
And then when they do the interview, they say this is our best album since,
Ever. Yeah.
they say the last.
Really proud of this. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really big, and I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate when you see artists that keep trying something new, and Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top are, Billy Gibbons in particular, being the primary force behind the band, is a great example of that.
What struck me, and, you hear things and you forget you've heard them, then you see something like your book, and it's like, "Oh, yeah, I forgot about that story," you know, the band tied in with, past classic rockers. You had Hendrix, and then you mentioned the story about the Doors. I mean, there's just almost something mystical about the band to where they're almost like in band form. I called Bobby Keys the Forrest Gump of rock and roll when I interviewed him. But I think the band, if there's gonna be a band that was the Forrest Gump of rock and roll, it could almost be ZZ Top. I mean, Hendrix, The Doors, you know, others. I mean, what did you take from that when there's these 2 members of the 27 Club that ZZ Top were tied to?
It's really impressive how at an early age, how successful the individual members of ZZ Top were in music. I mean, they were teenagers. Dusty Hill was playing behind Albert King,
Mhm.
as a teenager, serving in his backing band. And Billy Gibbons, too, as you said, he opened, his band, the Moving Sidewalks, opened for Hendrix. They opened for the Doors. Doors not so successfully. They caused a little bit of damage to the Doors equipment and may have spoiled a tour by doing that. But yeah, it's pretty impressive how many connections they had at an early age. And it's also impressive to see who they're connected to that you would also not expect. ZZ Top gave a lot of credit, Gibbons in particular, to Alice Cooper. They did a early tour with Alice Cooper when it was still the Alice Cooper group,
Mhm.
and they said, we toured the Northeast, and he said, I think people thought we were weirder than Alice Cooper because we were wearing cowboy boots and cowboy hats. He goes, and Alice
Music
Cooper,
fits.
looked like someone you would see on, the Bowery,
Yeah.
walking around New York City. He goes, but it taught us a valuable lesson of how important that showmanship is, in rock and roll, because ZZ Top gets lumped in with Southern rock a lot, which I understand. Texas, of course, is its own entity, but there's a lot of Southern rock bands that are jeans and T-shirts, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But ZZ Top, I don't know if they would have been as successful. The music's great, but if they didn't have that image,
Mhm.
that really set them apart.
That kind of a dusty Texas blues,
Yeah.
type of gritty sound to them, and a mystique,
Yes.
the sunglasses. I mean, Kiss had the makeup, Alice had the makeup,
You're right.
ZZ Top had sunglasses. I mean, cheap sunglasses.
That's right.
What do you hope? Well, a question I didn't write down, I thought of this while you were talking.
Sure.
There's the documentary that they put out that was great. In your mind, from your perspective, what do you bring out that's different in your book that maybe the documentary and let's tease it so people will buy the book, right?
Sure.
But where do you feel like you have something that the documentary doesn't cover?
So it's interesting that I'm glad you brought up the documentary because there's a whole chapter of my book devoted to that. Because that documentary, really serves as sort of the overview of ZZ Top, but it stops at Eliminator.
Mm,
Really, they go up to Eliminator and they said, and then we were really successful, and that's pretty much the end there. My book goes, of course, further into the story up until the present day, even covering the death of Dusty Hill and the aftermath since then. One thing I found really fascinating about the documentary, if you recall, if you've seen it, there's a lot of animated sequences in the
yes.
documentary, and the reason for that is Bill Ham, their manager, did not want much footage out there of ZZ Top in the 70s, up until they became MTV stars, really. Um, so that's why there's so little professionally shot footage of ZZ Top in the 70s,
Mm,
and very few live recordings of them. The ones that get passed around a lot are from Europe, stuff they did for in European shows, and European television and things like that. The reason for that was Bill Ham. You mentioned the word mystique. Really wanted to preserve the mystique of ZZ Top. He wanted people to see them in concert. He wanted them to buy tickets, and they were very successful at that very in the 70s. And he felt if the band was on the midnight special or something like that, people, whether rightly or wrongly, people would not go see them in concert because they could just see it on TV. So that's why in the documentary, and I spoke to some of the filmmakers and quoted them in the book, they had a lot of trouble putting it together because there just didn't exist any footage. Or if it did exist, they couldn't access it or it had deteriorated and whatever it was. So that is why have a lot of animated sequences in the movie. And that is why they have that jam that the three of them do together, which in the movie, of course, is presented as a spontaneous jam that, our instruments are just here. Let's play
mm,
together. Of
they happen
course.
to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. We just happen
Left
to
in here
be
last time.
yeah, and it's funny if you read the notes in the soundtrack album from the documentary for the soundtrack's called Raw and it's great. I mean the three play so well together. It's presented as if they were there with their instruments to do a photo shoot and just off the cuff started jamming. Of course, that's not really what happened if you speak to the filmmakers. So what I feel like that documentary is great, and I really love the way they presented the history of the band, especially in the animated sequences. I thought was really well done. It itself is part of the mystique. Um, and I talked about how there are some people I interviewed for the book that, because they either still work with the band or have worked with the band, preferred to remain anonymous. And one quote that one of the anonymous contributors said, he goes, "I love the documentary." He goes, "But I kept saying to myself, Billy, that's not really how it happened," as I watched it. Um, and so he said, "You could quote that, but just don't put my name in it." I said, "That's fair." But I will just say that the fellow that told me that, he would know. So,
Well, like you mentioned the Stones did. I mean, heck, Elvis did it. Colonel
oh, it's
Parker
myth
was
making. Yep.
notorious. Yeah, it's just. But I mean, I think I read two different interviews with Keith Richards about what the true meaning of brown sugar was, and he contradicted himself both times.
Yeah.
So it's just part of the myth making, like you said. What one thing I noticed. I want to see if you agree with this. I only saw ZZ Top twice, and both times were after Dusty had passed. And one takeaway I had was, yeah, our generation. I think you're a bit younger than me, but the baby boomer generation, they can tend to be, have a lot more disposable income if the economy hasn't tanked them yet, and so they come across that, they might be a little callous towards going to concerts and all that, or used to going. And then it seemed to me in the crowds, I saw them both in Chattanooga by them. No, they were the main act, and then they were the opening act a few months ago for Leonard Skinner here in Knoxville. And so, what I noticed in the crowd, especially in Knoxville, is that there seemed to be a much more working class feel to the crowd. And it occurred to me, especially while watching ZZ Top play, Skinner is who gave me the tickets, great seats, and I'm getting to watch everybody up close and personal. And I mean, Billy and those guys just had everybody eating out of their hands, and and it hit me while I was watching them. This is truly one of America's true working class bands. I mean, yeah, they're millionaires, but you wouldn't know it. But look at, I mean, Billy's old beat up. Yeah, he looked like the true blues man. And I felt like, and looking at the crowd and how they are reacting, and of course, Skinner's a working class band too, but what a perfect pairing. At least that was my perception. What's your takeaway on that?
So it's interesting that you talked about how they had the crowd just eating out of the palm of their hand. ZZ Top learned very early. There's three of them. They have to be able, and early on they didn't have the gimmicks that they would later have, during the '80s. And now they've sort of, as the economics of touring, they've really scaled back to a lot of their, you know, old stage effects. But they learned very quickly that there's three of us on stage, and one of them's a drummer, so he doesn't move. He doesn't move much. So the two of us, we got to learn. We got to learn a way to draw the crowd's attention, because it's sort of funny that Leonard Skinner and ZZ Top are touring together, because you got Leonard Skinner where there's 12 people on the stage. I'm probably exaggerating, but there's three
Close. I think it's
guitarists. Yeah, three
close.
guitarists, a pianist, a drummer, backup singers, the lead singer. You got a lot of people, on the stage, and then you have ZZ Top, one of the smallest bands. That's three people, and that's where Billy and Dusty worked on a lot of their choreography. They do their Texas two steps
Mhm,
and all that, and it really worked for them, because they know, okay, we're a small band, so we need to have a larger than life presence on the stage.
mhm,
Because it's not like bands that just have a solo lead singer. A lot of the time, the attention is just on the lead singer. Or you take a band like AC/DC, where three of the members barely move, and then you got Angus and Malcolm, not
just
Malcolm,
all over the
Angus and Brian
yeah,
going all over the stage.
yeah,
More so Angus. But that's sort of something that they learn. And yeah, I agree. They really have been the soundtrack to so many bars, jukeboxes, auto shops. It's really something that that you can pick up on that music, and I feel a lot of people just connect with it. It's good time fun, just like a lot, and they're still drawing crowds today based on that.
You sure are. What do you hope fans get from your book?
I hope they get especially people that really love ZZ Top like I do. I hope they learn to if I know they already appreciate Billy Gibbons, but I want them to appreciate him in a new way, realizing that, you know, um, even though he has, like he talked about, that kind of bluesman image, like I just came off the street and I found this guitar and I'm going to make it, a lot of what he does is very thought out, very calculated. I mean that in the most positive sense. And focused on what he does as a musician and what he gives to his audience. I talked to several people that know Billy Gibbons on a personal level and said, he has played for me this like beautiful music that he's composed that he has not put out because he knows, that's not quite my audience. And, maybe we'll hear it someday, but, he knows what the ZZ Top audience wants. And, he stretches his wings a little with his solo stuff, but he is very keen and very appreciative of what the audience takes from them. I remember a great quote I got from the filmmakers from the ZZ Top documentary is they're also the same company that made the Rush documentary Beyond the Lighted Stage. And when they were pitching the movie pitching to do a movie for ZZ Top, they said, we're the guys who did the Rush movie. And they said, Billy Gibbons said, almost not in a negative way, but just said, we're not Rush, we're ZZ Top. And a lot of people might put them, well, there's 3 guys and 3 guys, and a lineup of 3 guys that has rarely changed in the history of the band. Of course, the music is completely different,
Right.
um, but I think that's sort of his awareness of what ZZ Top is and what it means to people, I think is something that fans would really appreciate.
Yeah, cool. So what's next, man? You've done the Stones, you've done Tom Petty, and now Billy Gibbons. What's
So
what's up your sleeve?
So actually, this is a 2-book release year, which I'm glad, I'm proud that I have 2 books coming out in 2024. But I think I will stop myself from ever trying to write 2 books within the span of I think it was about 18 months, 2 years. I think in October I have a book on the Stray Cats coming out,
Oh,
and who they're just about to launch a 45th anniversary tour, and as we speak, I think in 2 days, I think is the first concert.
mhm,
I'm originally from Long Island, New York, and that's where the Stray Cats come from. Even though based on their music, you think they wandered out of Memphis,
yeah.
but they're actually from Long Island, New York. Brian Setzer, they and Brian Setzer, Slim Jim Phantom, and Lee Rocker, and they. I've just always been a huge, and I don't know if it's a trio thing, who knows, but I've always been a huge fan of their music, not just because I grew up not far from where they grew up, before me, but also because they have that connection to that rockabilly classic sound, and they were
Mhm,
able to be successful with it 20, 30 years after it was originally popular.
mhm,
And that's really impressive stuff. And all 3 of them have continued to fly the flag of rockabilly. And I really, and speaking of a band like ZZ Top that kept the same core members for so long up until Dusty Hill's death. Um, what I really appreciate about Stray Cats is it's the same 3 members and will always be the same 3 members. They only play together as the Stray Cats with the 3 of them. They all do their solo thing, rockabilly
mhm.
stuff on their own. But even if like 2 of them team up, like Brian Setzer has done a tour with Slim Jim Phantom, the drummer, on occasion, they won't call themselves the Stray Cats because that's not the band. It's really those 3 guys. And sort of delving into how they were able to revive rockabilly um, in 1980, 19, in the 1980s is pretty impressive stuff. They were huge in England. They had
Yeah.
the Stones coming to their concerts. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards actually wanted to produce their first album, but they ended up going with Dave Edmunds, probably for the better.
Yeah.
They at the time the Stones were very, very busy, and I don't think they would have had the time to really produce the album. So that book comes out October 1st. It's called Howling to the Moonlight on a Hot Summer Night: The Tale of the Stray Cats.
Very cool.
Yes,
Anything?
thank you.
Are you working on anything now?
Now I'm in pitch stage, where I'm trying to come up with the next thing. I also, even though because I started in the film world, I really want to do a film book, and I have one that's sort of on its way, so that's good. But I really want to do another film book. I'm starting to get known for music books, and I'm happy to keep doing them as long as I can find interesting enough subjects to work
Mm.
on. And there's plenty.
Oh, yeah.
And I have kind of the mental list in my head of who I want to work on next. But each book I learn more stuff, and each book I seem to be doing making a little more connections and getting a little bit more of a name for myself.
Mm.
So hopefully I got some other big ones coming down the pike.
Well,
Just we'll see.
that'd be fantastic. When you do, let's talk, and if I can be of any
Of
help,
course, Randy.
I don't know as many people as you do probably. If you think I do, ask. If I do, I'll help. If I don't, maybe I know somebody who can help, so
That would be awesome, Randy. I'd
so
appreciate that.
well, man, I'm glad we finally got to talk. It took us too long to get together though, man, but I'm glad we finally did, and let's continue to stay in touch, and please let me know if there's anything I could ever do. We can do one of these. If you got something else going, whatever, let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Randy, and thanks to your website for covering all this music that we all love.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. So, all right, my
Excellent.
friend, let's talk soon. Take care.
All right, take care.
Bye bye.